In the 1980s, video games were created in the form of arcade machines. Most of the games from the arcade featured mascots that had lived on even today, from Donkey Kong and Pac-Man to Dig Dug and Frogger. Today, there is now a wide variety of video games in the form of home consoles. Most United States homes have at least one video game console within it. The year is 2011 and there are many mascots for many video game companies. Nintendo has Super Mario, Sega has Sonic the Hedgehog, Microsoft has Master Chief, and Sony has the Sackboy. But how did these games get where they are today? What game and what system was the first you ever played?
I played Pong.
On
the Atari 2400.
Super Mario World for the original Nintendo.
At the beginning, there were not many games and consoles released in the 1980s. However, we had the Nintendo Entertainment System, an 8-bit gaming system that could handle graphics that the Atari could not. The Atari, which was one of the first competition for the Nintendo, and the Commodore 64. Most of these games consisted of 2 to 8 squares/bits. What do you think of the differences between the Nintendo and the Atari?
The Nintendo is 16-bit, and it's a little bit better game.
Today, most stores carry and sell video games instead of having to go to a certain store to buy them. Where could you buy games back then compared to now?
I used to be able to get them at like Kmart, Sears. They really didn't have like GameStop or Circuit City, Best Buy weren't around. It was Kmart, Myers, pretty much.
GameStop. It's been around for about 10 years or so, and I used to go there, back in the day, and I would get games there for a reasonable price. Or Target. Target has a good selection of games.
However, in the 1990s, a company named Sega entered the video game industry, and after the Master System, Sega made the Sega Genesis, with the big words of 16-bit on the hardware. What advantages did Sega have over the Nintendo?
One word. Sonic.
Well, the Sega was a 16-bit. The Sega CD, and the Nintendo was a cartridge. So I think they had a better advantage putting stuff on a disc than they could in a cartridge.
What was the differences between the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis?
The shapes and the colors, and one, like I said, one ran a disc and the other one was a cartridge.
Well, other than Mario and Sonic, the obvious one, they play different games, different quality of games. With the Sega, you had like a different quality of images and graphics, but with Nintendo, you had something that was reliable, and you knew it was there, and it was gonna last. They still last today.
For the beginning of the 1990s, Sega started a comeback after its Master System with the Sega Genesis, with graphics no one has ever seen before, with a mascot who was a blue hedgehog with an attitude. His name was Sonic the Hedgehog, and was released to compete with Nintendo's Super Mario franchise. But Sonic was faster and was one of the first ever games to show the Genesis's blast processing. Nintendo released the Super Nintendo, which was a 16-bit console to compete with Sega in the ongoing console wars. It was packaged with Super Mario World. The console wars continued for 4 years between Nintendo and Sega, and then Sony decided to enter the console war with the Sony PlayStation to compete with Nintendo and Sega. What was your opinion on the Nintendo 64 and the Sony PlayStation?
I believe the graphics were a little bit better, I thought, on the 64 than the Sega. Even though it was a disc in the Sony, it was a cartridge, but I believe the graphics were better, I thought.
I like the Nintendo 64 a lot more than the PlayStation, but as I grew up, the PlayStation has become better in my eyes because of its graphics and the quality of games that they make compared to Nintendo.
Sony released games such as Crash Bandicoot, Bomberman, and Spyro the Dragon. Most games were shared by Sony and Sega, like Capcom's Mega Man 8. Nintendo released games like Zelda Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Star Fox 64, and many others. Sega released Sonic R, Sonic 3D Blast, Knights, and Daytona Racing for their Sega Saturn. What part do you think the PlayStation played in the Nintendo versus Sega war?
It was very well. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing.
They played a major part because they got the older gamers involved with the shooter games and the better graphics too. So they were able to buy games that suited them better than the games that were for little kids, such as Mario and Yoshi.
What differences do you think all the three consoles shared?
Other than what they look like, the graphics and the style of play that they brought to that person.
Endless entertainment for the gamer.
Sega released their last and final system, and packaged with it was games much like the Sony's, like Sonic Adventure, Sama de Amigo, and many others, in the summer of 1998. Why do you think Sega ended its consoles?
It just couldn't compete with Nintendo and the likes of Mario and Yoshi. I mean, Sonic wasn't that big of a seller, and all the other games, you know, it's a fad. Nintendo was one of the big fads, and everybody had to have one, so nobody really cared about having a Dreamcast or a Sega. It was all about Nintendo back in the day. But as we can see, that all has changed now, with going to Xbox and PlayStation. So
I'm not sure.
In 2001, Nintendo announced plans for their next console, the GameCube, a 120-bit gaming machine. Meanwhile, Microsoft made the Xbox to compete with Sony and Nintendo, and Sony announced the PlayStation 2, which was considered the middle brother between the Xbox and the GameCube.
That was like, you know, a lot better graphics. It was like brand new when it came out, you know, the black unit, the very first one. And they offered a lot of good games. Mostly like car games, you know, like Starsky and Hutch and a few others like Need for Speed Underground and stuff like that.
the first one I got was the PlayStation 2. That was a lot of fun. It was like building on something new, something that nobody's ever seen before, and it was fun. And then GameCube, that was a lot of fun with like Luigi's Mansion and Mario Sunshine. You know, that brings back some good memories. And the Xbox, you gotta talk about the Xbox. That was like gaming at its finest back then.
Games like Super Mario Sunshine, Halo, and Sly Cooper started to be made for their exclusive new consoles, and some third-party games from Sega. Later in 2005, Microsoft updated its Xbox to handle 360 bits and have HD gameplay, and it was cleverly titled the Xbox 360. Later on in 2006, Nintendo and Sony had seen Microsoft's presentation with the Xbox 360 and decided to update their consoles as well. Nintendo made history at E3 2006, where they revealed the Wii, a motion-controlled gaming system that encourages gamers to get up and play. However, Sony updated to the PlayStation 3, which was more oriented for hardcore gamers and teenagers. But the Wii was physically more family-oriented. The Wii had games like Super Mario Galaxy, Zelda Twilight Princess, and Sonic Unleashed. Providing motion controls revolutionized gaming, but in 2009, Sony announced the PlayStation Move to keep up with the industry and made most PS3 games more compatible with it. They also released PlayStation 3i. Microsoft created an Intel, later named the Kinect, showing the radio revolution in gaming. So here we are, we have the Wii with motion controls, the PlayStation 3 with the Move controls, and the PS3i, and the Xbox 360 with the Kinect. But where do we go from here? In 2011, Nintendo announced the Nintendo 3DS, the first attempt of 3D gaming, since we already have 3D TVs with updated graphics better than the original DS. We also have Sony making the PSP 2 and a PlayStation phone, which gives Nintendo handhelds a fair competition. Hopefully in the future we can have a game that uses sunglasses to see in the real-time action that gives you the chance to be a part in the game and interact with its characters.